too far without telling me more about.
The one that I'm sure will come up later in the video with over 1 million views, maybe up to 2 now. I'm not really sure. I haven't checked in a minute. But it was a style just like this. It was one of our behind the scenes videos that we did with Lyrical Lemonade. And the way we shoot it, the way we edit it, the way we interact with people, the way we keep the good relationships going is what allowed us to keep things going.
Absolutely. I like hearing that too, because I think we can all learn from each other, and that's a nice crew, right? That was a good shot of you guys in that. In there as a group shot.
The good thing about
this is on TV because this got this guy on there. This guy from England?
Well, this
Mr. Bean.
There you go. You gotta add a little flavor.
Okay, all right. I just
got to make sure people still watching.
Yeah.
Okay.
What makes your peanut butter and jelly sandwich better than somebody else's? So
okay. Yeah. Well, the wheel has been invented. There's no doubt about that. Your wheel can go a little faster, slower, bigger, wider.
Absolutely.
You want to go. Got to be yours, by the way.
Well, that's the important part. You got to be you. You got to stay you. Because a lot of people try to change you.
Right. We have 2 short films that were almost on the brink of finishing.
Dun.
Once we finish those, guys,
let's talk about it.
I'm telling you, we're going to make an impact in this film community.
All right, this is music to my ears right here. You guys can't go too far without telling me more about. You've got
this
two,
is an
not
exclusive,
one, but 2.
We got two
exclusive TVT exclusive.
Yes, sir.
A lot of people don't know about it, but like you said, anybody knows any good feature film work, it takes a while. It's a process.
You're keeping it under wraps, but yeah, you're right about that. I mean, it does take a long time to get those shots, and particularly if you're shooting a short film, you want it cinematic. You want it to really kind of take the viewer where you want the viewer to go by watching that one scene and cutting to the next and so forth. So, that's very cool. Tell me a little bit more about whatever you can tell me. I'll take. Come on, you got to break a little ice on this thing.
Well, without actually telling the plot, a little background story. Well, background just of what we're doing. Well, pretty much we meet a lot of different influential people every day, and we have. I want to say we have custom relationships with each person, and with these relationships, I'm trying to find a way where, I wouldn't quite say like monetize a relationship, but I want to make sure we can use a relationship in a way that works for us, as well.
Right.
So, while I was doing a short film, I was like, the people I was coming across, I was asking them like, hey, would you mind being a part of this short film? Or, hey, would you mind if your artist be a part of this short film? And they always ask me like, hey, what's the plot? What is it about? And as soon as I tell them, they usually are on board. So pretty much we've met tons of people that say they want to be involved, and even if they have a small role, just those people being in the role just for however long they've been, it's going to just bring a huge awareness to what we're doing. So
you have a story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today.
You did a great job the other day on ad-libbing on the street videos. Dr. Long.
Appreciate that.
Dr. Long shot me an email, and the title of the email was Street Videos. And he was, yeah. So I thought, we're in trouble now.
No,
but,
street videos.
But street video.
can I plug that in there?
As long as I can have street tacos in there somewhere.
You got a plug there? Try it. You got a plug.
This man. See, this is what I've learned. I've learned that I can't take him anywhere.
All right, there you go.
I've learned that for sure.
He's trying to. He's already sent like 12 Instagrams and 42 tweets out. What's up?
Unfortunately,
go ahead, because you don't want to hear what I gotta say.
Unfortunately, Dr. B, we put out tons of great quality work, and the thing is, they see it.
Okay.
They might not click on it, but they see it. So make sure I'm putting it in, an available space for them to see it. So
in their own time, because we understand people come to their their own lights and understands in their own time and space. So it'll be out there. You can take your time, go do what you gotta do.
Well, I'm just glad to have you guys in the studio. That's all I.
But Santi is the man, Dr. B. I just want to let y'all know Santi
All right.
is the man.
Santi, you were talking those street videos, and Dr. Long sent me he liked them, by the way. He really thought it was kind of cool ad lib about it. You guys were just
I was reading off
you were
the teleprompter.
freestyling. No, you were not. You were out there, man. And
The words were just,
I mean, the word came in. Somebody said the word alien, and then it was like, hey, you. Alien hunters, you need to have a podcast. I like it.
gotta grab the attention.
That was very cool, very smooth, and I think that's an example too of just being yourself and being in the moment, and responding with that authenticity we were talking about a moment ago, and having fun at the same time. Now you can't have fun all the time because that doesn't necessarily make money. And move the part A down to part B.
But go back to your last point real quick. As far as one thing we've learned, and to what you just pointed on, being yourself. That's one of the main things that we've learned throughout working with everyone we work with is we had to stay true to who we were, regardless of what happened.
Makes sense.
We were put in a lot of different scenarios and situations and places where you're often given a choice. Do you be you, or do you switch it up? And we've, since day one, we've stayed true to ourselves. Comes with the good and the bad, but overall we like
with the bad.
Let's say sometimes it comes with the bad.
Not everybody's going to be a fan, right? I mean, you better.
There are a lot of non-fans.
Right. What you said.
All right, that's what he said. All right, so but I'm thinking you're right about that. But that that's part of life, and sort of moving through those moments. That it's not all about your hurt feelings, or it's not all about some thought you have in your head all the time. You got to kind of move on and get over that, and not be so self-critical, or not have your ego so fragile.
Egos are out there. If you want to be, I don't want to say, you got to, in order to be successful, you got to remove your ego, because there's a lot of successful egotistic people.
Oh yeah.
But
these days and times,
like he said, with these relationships nowadays, with the way the society is if you can just maneuver better, is that me?
I think that is.
If you can just maneuver better with people, aka, like you said, sometimes don't always think about yourself. Don't put you in front of everything. Things will work better, because if everyone is thinking about everyone else, then everyone is taken care of. It's that simple. Because if you're just only thinking about yourself and you can't care for another person, like no one else can be cared of than just you.
So the transits that are still interesting to us here in 2019 are the ones that are taking place in other solar systems.
Okay.
Now, wait a minute.
Yes.
That implies something, right?
Yes, it does.
That implies that there are actually planets around other stars. And in fact, the very way we discovered planets around other stars had to do with the way that the planets were orbiting around those parent stars.
Right.
And so there's a whole new class of planets that we know a lot about now.
Yes.
That are called extrasolar planets.
Extrasolar planets.
Extrasolar. Extrasolar means they're not orbiting our sun, they're orbiting another star.
All right.
We now know of over 4,000 extrasolar planets.
Wait a minute. 4,000.
Over 4,000. And by the way, that
4,000.
number keeps going up, so it's a little bit hard for me to keep track. I think the latest number I saw was 4,084 known confirmed exoplanets or extrasolar planets.
Incredible.
And so by the way, let me throw that shortening in.
Yes.
You'll see the word exoplanet.
Right.
And exoplanet is just because guys like myself got tired of saying extrasolar planet. It was just too many syllables.
Yeah.
So we just cut it down to exoplanet.
Shorten it up. Make it quick. And we're moving on. Okay, I got it.
In with a cool crowd. So if you're in with a cool crowd, you'll call them exoplanets. So when you hear the term exoplanet, just think about a planet around a star that's not the sun. It's around another one of those stars that we see up in the sky.
First of all, that's just amazing that we have that technology,
Right.
and it's sort of brilliant scientific thinking to figure this out. I think,
and that's
in so
what
many
I'd like
ways.
to address a little bit. How did we find these things, right?
Yeah.
There's two ways that we found exoplanets, and actually the first way is a little bit more complicated. It's a pretty specialized circumstance.
Okay.
That's when a very big, massive planet is orbiting a fairly small star at a fairly close range.
Right.
When that's happening, scientists can actually detect the star moving in and out relative to the Earth. But really what it's doing, it's kind of going around in a circle. Now, we don't see that other planet, but we can see the star moving in a circle. Well, that implies that there has to be another planet out there tugging it and making it move. The
Okay.
planet does not give off light, so it's not bright enough
that's
for us
right.
to see.
Yes, I remember you saying, "Hey, it's all about light."
Right.
That's how we
Astronomy's
get to see
prejudiced to
things.
things that glow in the dark. So that's why we have to watch those things that glow in the dark, right? So the star itself, though, is glowing nicely, and we can see that star moving around in its own little circle because of a common orbit with a very heavy planet. But to us, what we're measuring is the radial movement in and out. And we do that with this thing called Doppler shifts or red shift, blue shift. And so that's the wavelengths of light being shifted relative to because of the motion of that star.
Got
So
it.
one of the ways we can figure out that there are planets around other stars is we can just see that star, we can see that parent star vibrating in and out a little bit, which really means it's going around in tiny circles.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there
Okay,
are
that's
only a
cool.
very special few star planet combinations that are just right for us to detect that kind of radial motion.
Well, and it's at such a distance too. And
Exactly.
it's still mind-boggling, and for me anyway, that we can take those tiny little shifts and things, and then extrapolate that's an orbit.
That's right. That's right.
Pretty
Exactly.
cool idea.
But so astronomers came up with then a second way to potentially identify planets that were orbiting other stars. And this still is kind of a Goldilocks situation where everything has to be lined up just right.
Got it.
It's just that it's a more common occurrence, which is something called a transiting exoplanet. So we've talked about transits.
Okay.
Transits in our own solar system are a planet moving in front of the face of a sun. Well, a transiting exoplanet is another solar system out in our galaxy where the planet's planes of orbit are lined up just right to where the planet will pass in front of the face of its parent star.
Okay.
And when it does that, it dims the light from that parent star down a little bit.
Okay.
And then as it moves off the face of its parent star, the light comes back up again. So it's just passing between us. It's not actually touching the star, but
Right.
it's passing in between us and that star. It drops the light coming to Earth down a little bit as it moves in front, and then as it moves out of the way, the light comes back up again. So
Right.
so scientists developed a whole series of cameras that were very sensitive to picking up these slight variations in the light coming from stars due to planets passing in front of them. And they mounted some of those cameras on a couple of spacecraft. The
Okay.
first spacecraft to go into orbit around the Earth that had this technology on it was called Kepler.
Wow.
And so Kepler was a telescope named after Johannes Kepler, who studied planetary motions, by the way. So Kepler was a telescope that was specifically designed to watch thousands and thousands of stars, photograph them over and over and over, compare those images then from night to night, and see if this dimming of light was taking place.
Okay.
When Kepler then identified stars that were dimming, they would go back and do follow-up observations of those specific stars to see if they could more carefully measure the dimming of that starlight.
Okay.
And with that technology, Kepler was able to identify literally thousands of candidates for planets orbiting other stars. So then that information is given to the astronomy community on the surface of the Earth. Those astronomers then begin to watch those star systems, and then they can
Right.
identify those planets very carefully and figure out the characteristics. How big is the planet? How long does it take to move in front of the star? Therefore, how far away from its parent star is it? All those kinds of things.
Well, they give you that information, so that you said follow up, so everyone can start to follow up and
Exactly.
then see what the distances are and see if there are other planets there, but not just the one you see. So this Kepler telescope sounds like an amazing piece of equipment.
And it was. So the Kepler telescope spent several years in service, and it is now defunct.
Okay, all
its
right.
cameras quit working, but in the process though, Kepler, we went from knowing about a dozen or so exoplanets to literally knowing about thousands of exoplanets, all because of the data coming from the Kepler Space Telescope. But if you can imagine the process I just described, it kind of had a prejudice, a selection effect is what we call it in
Oh,
science.
okay.
its selection effect was it tended to find big planets around other stars. And that's because it was looking for stars that were dimming down. Well, obviously, the bigger the planet is, the more the starlight will dim down as the planet moves in front of the face of the sun, or of that face of that other star.
Right.
So Kepler's exoplanets that it identified were pre-selected to be big ones.
Yes.
So those planets wouldn't be capable of supporting what we would call life as we know it, right?
Yes.
Think of them as like mega Jupiters.
Right.
So
right.
so Jupiter's already impossible for us to live on. It's a gas giant. Gravity is way too strong, all that stuff.
Right. Okay.
So think about something that's, 10 to 100 times the size of Jupiter. So
There's not going to be life on something like
Yeah,
that, generally speaking.
it's not a perfect situation for what we know as life here on Earth, which is something that is carbon based, something that lives with liquid water and lives on liquid water and things like that. So when we're looking for the kind of life that we understand,
Sure.
it's better for us to look for planets that are about the same size and about the same distance away from their parent star as the Earth is. Or in other words, they're about the right distance from their parent star where liquid water could potentially exist on the surface.
That sounds like a very difficult thing to measure. You're really trying to look at that parent star for that planet and measure the distance in the Goldilocks zone that
that's
you were
right.
talking about. I just don't understand the math that get behind that, so
Well,
I won't even try.
But I can give you a quick preview, which is this. One of the reasons that telescope got named Kepler is because Johannes Kepler, back in the 1600s, actually did something very brilliant. He figured out that the period of time it takes for a planet to go around the sun is related to how far away it is. Now, that doesn't sound that amazing. It's like, okay, well, the farther it is away, the longer it takes to go around. I get it. But no, with Kepler's law, and this is Kepler's third law, it related it exactly in a mathematical way. So if you could figure out the period of the orbit, you could actually figure out exactly how far away it was from the parent star.
Okay.
And so we can apply Kepler's third law, which he applied to our own planets in our own solar system. We can apply that to these exoplanets. So if we see the same planet move in front of that star a couple of times, we know the period of its orbit. And if we know the period of its orbit and the mass of the parent star, which we have other ways to figure that out,
Right.
then we can figure out exactly how far away it is.
Oh,
If we can
okay.
figure out
That
how far
sounds
away it is, then we can figure out whether or not it's in the Goldilocks zone.
Right,
That
because we
just
know
not too
ours.
hot, not too cold, just right for water to exist on the surface, right?
Right.
So all right. So
you got, let me just say, see if I'm following this. You got Kepler out there, this great telescope. This telescope is finding these giant planets passing in front of these smaller suns.
That's right.
Of theirs. And now the next step is to look at a planet that is maybe connected, because if our solar system has 8 planets, okay. Anyway, generally the idea is there are going to be other planets with it too, and it's certainly if that planet you can find is going to be within that Goldilocks zone, then we're golden, and we've got a planet that may support life.
right. So in order to find those Earth-like planets that are just that right distance away from bigger stars, being all more like the Earth situation, we needed a telescope that had just a lot better resolution than Kepler had.
Right.
And so that's what really was required. So NASA then developed a brand new spacecraft
Okay.
called TESS.
All right.
And TESS is a spacecraft that is the TESS is an acronym. It stands for Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite.
Okay, so they went right at it.
They went
were
right
trying
at it,
to
yes.
get the information they needed, named it the same.
Exactly.
All right, got it.
So with TESS, or the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, NASA developed a spacecraft that was better suited for high resolution imaging of very minute variations in star brightness to find these Earth-like planets around stars capable of supporting life.
Right.
And so now that TESS has come online, the expectation, TESS has only been up there for a very short time, by the way.
Right.
So TESS is actually expected to identify maybe as many as 20,000 new exoplanets. And among that group of 20,000 new exoplanets, a substantially large number, yet unknown, but substantially large number of Earth-sized planets, Earths or super Earths, which means something that's Earth-sized or a little bit bigger, not the size of Jupiter, but just a little bit bigger. So when TESS begins to return data, which it already has, and when we get that full catalog of TESS identified exoplanets,
Right.
we're going to have a lot better idea of what planets are out there capable of supporting life because they're in their Goldilocks zone of their own parent star, and they're closer to the gravitational conditions of our own Earth.
And well, here's how it happened, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going out to my truck out the front door here at 1214 First Avenue to pick up a book that Dr. Hackett and I are going to do a Talk with Mike and Tom podcast coming up pretty soon. And happened to run into two of my favorite people walking down the street. I think I scared them just a little bit. Did I not scare you?
You scared me.
Okay, I didn't mean
Absolutely.
to. I did. That door
Well, you know
opened.
what happened? You didn't scare me.
I think I did.
I think you startled my very skittish significant other. And
Okay,
then
let's
he
get a
lunged out.
close up of him over there
Yes.
being skittish. All right, perfect.
Don't
That's
say
how
boo.
it looks.
Don't say boo. And then he jumped. He lunged. Let me just use a better word. He lunged.
He lunged.
He did.
Yeah.
And then he startled me. And so then.
Well, it all happened when I opened the door. So
That's right.
Yes.
I want to apologize for my opening of the door.
I think
was
that's
trying
it.
to get out of the
I think
building. What
that's
did I
it.
do wrong? I don't know. And absolutely, there is no crime that's been committed here. Okay, I want to make sure. Is that true? Now,
True statement.
you have a background. You tell us a little bit about your background because you may know more about true crime than any of us. What do you think?
Maybe a little bit. I've never dabbled in criminal law.
Okay.
But I do have a background in law. I have a Juris Doctorate. So
Okay, so you're working as an attorney,
Yeah.
so you've probably seen some things around. Now you do have interest, and so maybe one of your interests is true crimes. Is that true? I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah, I do. You know, investigative reporting, true crime, and it's not something I've ever really talked about. I just happened to mention to my current that I like to listen to certain podcasts. But you know,
That's current right there.
Thank you for pointing. Yes, good. So
No,
can we just say
mean-
this is my first time in your studio? We talked about people's second times. It's my first time here.
Well, listen.
I'm really enjoying
first,
this.
first of all, welcome. You are
you.
always
Thank you.
welcome here at the studio, and we have a lot of good folks coming in, good people, good podcasts is what we say on our advertising. So, I was telling you guys a story about when Dr. Hackett and the film crew, we went out on the streets of Broadway, and we were asking people to be a part of our promotional video about podcast here. And you can find us at columbuspodcasting.com. So one of the things we asked, do you listen or watch, because it's both audio and video, podcast? And I was surprised. First of all, everyone was watching podcasts or listening to podcasts. Everyone we talked to. That sort of confirmed some things for me. But secondly, when we asked what they liked, a good percentage of the people said, you guessed it,
True crime.
true crime.
True crime.
All right, now what? All right, I'm fascinated. I've said before, I've read a few of those mystery novels. I've got audio books and I'm listening and so forth, but I'm not sure it's true crime. There's an entire category of true crime. So, Shatul, let me ask you, what is your definition of sort of the true crime genre?
So I think, and one of the things what I said to you is, before we get into that, I think we have to really look at, what I find interesting is, it depends who you ask, right?
Right.
So I think people pull different things out of these quote unquote true crime podcasts, just like we get into the books of true crime,
Right.
mystery, suspense. If you go into like the James Patterson type
Right,
stories,
right,
right?
right, yeah.
We have a character, we have antagonists, we have protagonists, we have the whodunits, right?
Right. There's a plot points that move through and you kind of mislead
you have the
folks
arc.
a little bit. Your arc, and you're
Right.
trying to find, yes.
And then everybody's with you. You're on it. You know who did it. And then there's that dun dun dun, not who you thought.
Wow, yeah.
Right?
That kind of keeps us there, doesn't it? I
It
think
keeps
that's what
us
happens.
there. It keeps us right there with you. And so, but then there's that other genre of the cold case. Nobody could figure it out. Maybe you'll figure it out. Let us give you everything we have. You might be the one.
So
There's that
now
whole
wait,
era.
now wait a second. Now, if I like it. First, it's intriguing, but is it really an unsolved case, a cold case, and it's kind of left up to the listener to help figure it out?
Depends on what you're listening to. There are some out there that present everything that we have. We're going to, whoever the moderator or the narrator or whoever is the person. I don't like the cold case files ones. I need to get to the end. I need you to catch it.
Well, I had heard that. Now, somebody just let this slip, and I was listening. But they say, listen, one of the first things you need to do is go to the end of the book or the end of the story and find out who did it, and then work your way back and then start over. I'm not sure that's always true.
Well, not for me. As I said, I think it just depends on who you are. And this comes back to, I'm a lawyer, you're a psychologist, right? That's what we do for a living. That doesn't necessarily always align with our dispositions or our backstory, right?
Right.
So I think we all bring a lot to the table in all of our years of living. Our
So we might
history.
come up with something that no one else.
Or not
found.
just for the solving of the mystery, but I mean, why are we interested in this? A lot of times when I'm listening to things, what I really like to hear is, how did the lawyers treat these stories that are involved in this? How did they deal with some of the examination of the witnesses? How did they deal with the experts in the case? How did they
Right.
deal with the law enforcement aspect of it? That's just a interest of mine.
Well, that fascinates me too. I like that a lot because I want to know how they really checked out the evidence. What's your alibi? Well, I was at so-and-so's place at this time. Well, if it's a good detective, they're not going to take the word for it. They're going to go there. They're going to get witnesses. They're going to get up more evidence to make sure that alibi sticks. So.
Well, and what now? Okay, you just hit the 30,000 foot view of that.
Okay.
Bring it down. If by profession you're now dealing with personalities, you're dealing with, let's say, traits, characteristics.
Or personalities, or even, as we're going to talk about on another podcast coming up with the good Dr. Hackett, the personality disorder, maybe even the psychopath. So there's some crazy characters
Well, and
out
let
there.
me tell you how that works for me. When I hear personalities or disorders, there's some nuance there as well. And when we're dealing with dispositions of people, we're dealing with the entire people, the population. So as a lawyer, in all of my cases, I have to work and collaborate with agencies, clients, opposing counsel, fact witnesses, expert witnesses. Many times I can't really get to what I need to get to until I figure out how to get to that person. So
Right.
as I'm watching, as I'm listening, more than the true crime, more than the murder itself, what I'm really interested in is the victim, the victimology. There's some profiling type stuff that goes on. But what I'm
Right.
really getting to is the stuff that would normally be redacted, the law enforcement sensitive stuff out of document productions, for example. In any case, I can really hear that from a different perspective. This is now a reporter who maybe through a FOIA request has gotten evidence or has gotten documents or has gotten things from the entire police file. And then if there's things that are redacted, the reporters who's now reporting this podcast knows what's protected through First Amendment privileges, has
Okay.
now gotten through the trouble, has gotten to all of this trouble, done the legwork, has gotten things unredacted, and now has gotten all of this culminated,
Yes, I got you.
all of it, culled through it, and really what I think has put together a relevant case file and is reporting it in a way that is now fun, entertaining, put it together in an hour or a 2-part series, you know what? And I can drink a glass of wine and listen to it.
Yeah, and I think you are not the only one. Based on our little trip, our field trip out here on Broadway, down in downtown Columbus, or uptown Columbus, as Dr. Hackett calls it. And what we found out was that people are really enjoying it. I've also talked to some people too that in just normal conversation, sometimes things will come up. What'd you watch? And they somebody inevitably will say Dateline. And this is one of those late night shows on some channel that people watch, and some person has been murdered or missing, and then they put together a show. And in that show, of course, it has to be entertaining, unfortunately. There's some kind of mixed message there, I'm not sure. But the idea would be that they're uncovering information as they go along. And so Dateline is a podcast too, I'm finding out here. All right, thanks for it. I just got a in the ear reminder that there are podcasts already out there. But yeah, so the example of Dateline is like a true crime podcast. And so the unraveling of the information, the tracking down, and you kind of hear someone, do you believe them with what they're saying? Wait a minute, maybe some evidence that says, no, he wasn't at that point, or it didn't say that, or didn't happen. So somebody's lying. We got to figure that out. Those kind of things, I think, attract us all. Mm-hmm. We want to solve the mystery. Mm-hmm. We need to solve the mystery.
And you almost feel like you're in that seat where you can now yourself discern what's believable, not believable. And then you know what? You wrap it up. It's an hour. You go away.
Yeah, I gotta admit that, the psychology of this is that we dabble just enough, and we probably go up to the point, and Dan Rose talks about this somewhere, where we go up to the fear and the anxiety level that it doesn't cause us so much distress, but it invigorates us a little bit. It adds that energy to it, and then we're out, and there are no real consequences to us.
And this is the difference between the cold case files, and where there's no end,
right,
versus the closed. There's a verdict.
Right.
A resolution is what you're talking about
there's
then?
A resolution.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I really think that for a lot of this, I get disappointed when someone says, well, we'll never know.
Right.
And I go, no, we need to
resolution.
know. I need to know what happened to this guy or that. And so that doesn't quite, I'm a little resentful of the fact that you left it to me. Okay, great. You left it to me. This is the way I'll decide. But the fact of the matter is, somebody committed that crime. There's enough evidence. They go through the jury. They get convicted. And at that point, we can move on with our lives.
Yeah, and there's enough in our real lives that's unresolved. There's enough in our day-to-day reality, right, that's tumultuous and angst-ridden. That's not why we go to entertainment. That's somebody else's life. Resolve it for us.
That's right. So it doesn't cross that boundary into our own lives. Although we have a lot of things going on, all of us do, trying to figure out how to do the best we can. We don't necessarily need all that angst and worry and concern and fear and other kinds of things. I think, though, that we just have this built in some ways. We want to see something wrapped up and solved, when sometimes you're right, cold case, it never gets solved. It's still there. That's why they call it cold. Mm-hmm. And they'll come back to it. I've read in one of the books where they have a whole crew that does nothing but cold cases, and they come back and try to wrap up and put things together. They'll even go as far as interviewing people and digging up information and going forward, just try to resolve the case.
Another thing that comes to mind that a lot of people are interested in along these same lines is stories from things like the Innocence Project, where there's people on death row. I don't know if you all have heard of it, right? Where they've been either wrongfully convicted or have been there on death row for a long time. And then there's lawyers who devote so much time and energy where they pick one case among thousands.
Right.
And where they truly believe in this. And with the advent of DNA, being able to prove or disprove someone's guilt or innocence, they've been able to really put so much energy into appeal after appeal after appeal. And then people after 20, 30 years get proven innocent.
And finally get released from prison.
But then what happens, right? that's not always the end of the story. And there's a lot of people who are interested in that. I mean, not necessarily me, but then there's the aspect of people with disabilities, who are kind of on that line with intellectual disabilities who may have been sentenced to death row.
Right, because there are probably a lot of reasons. One, they couldn't afford, high-powered attorney and doing that. In some cases, they probably maybe couldn't really present like they're innocent. Maybe their disability money, sort of help people convict them just by that disability. There could be a number of things that happen, but I'm also wondering about this psychological piece of it, where we'll talk later about psychopaths, but the idea that you just don't have any empathy and you're getting over on people and that's not a problem for you, and you continue to cause problems and crimes and do what you need to do.
Well, and then there's that notion related to that, what we were just talking about, the false confessions. There's a technique called the Reid technique that's been now disproven, but a lot of false confessions come into that era. And that's a whole nother genre I think you guys could probably delve into another day. It would be very interesting, not necessarily true crime, but this is when we get into FBI folks, right? And these techniques. And the guy who the Reid technique is named after has himself said, do not use this technique. It's no good. We get a lot of false confessions with this. And it just goes down this other road. I would love to hear y'all's take on it one day.
That's kind of interesting. I'm not familiar with that, but the idea that you get enough pressure or you're in the right setting that you get somebody to confess based on some weakness or some issue that they have, and you kind of push that and they confess, and then the cops raise their hand and we're done.
We got it.
There
Close
we go.
it. Anyway, I would love to see you guys look into that. I would love to hear your take on
that
it,
would be
and
good.
just do a whole thing on that.
Well, I'm just glad you guys showed up in the studio, or actually on the street, and I drug you in, if the truth be known. But the idea of true crime as a podcast here, we've developed a number of podcasts. On Tuesday, we had the Vault TV crowd in here. Those guys are in the hip hop community, and they're doing some cool things. We just got their podcast finished. We got Dr. Sean Cruzen, the Coca-Cola Space Science Center director, talking about, coming up, by the way, and I hate to put a timestamp on this, but November 11th, which is next week as we record this, there's a transit of Mercury. So Mercury's going across the sun. They're going to track that, and he talked about that for a while. The Got Therapy podcast, and here we go with talk with Mike and Tom, who's our executive producer today. Dr. Hackett, good to have you in the studio. And I think we're doing a lot, but I think we're going to continue to do things around what people are listening to, because we are Columbus Podcasting. That's what we do. We want to invite people in. We want people to come by and stop and get involved with us. Talk about the things they want to, because after all, podcasting is just a conversation. It's about things of interest between us. So I'd love to see Columbus Podcasting put on a true crime podcast. So if anyone's out listening, or you know of anyone in the sound of my voice that are interested in the true crime podcast, get in touch with us here at Columbus Podcasting. We'll get something going for you, and keep that maybe a regular series about true crime. Do you have a case though, Shatul, that you no, not a case that you've worked on, but maybe because that wouldn't be right. But the idea of a true crime that you kind of remember as one, and give us a little highlight of a true crime that kind of comes to mind. And I may put you on the spot. I can also do that with Greg over there. Greg, are you a true crime enthusiast?
I'm not, but I have been told when I make family dinner, that's a true crime.
That is a true crime. I can always count on one thing, and I know Dr. Jeff Conklin, and I have been working on it for years, trying to help this young man with his joke telling. So far, we haven't made any movement whatsoever, and there's always a joke that just a little off the mark that always comes in. And so, Greg, we appreciate that, but not a true crime. But you could be a listener and enjoy true crime. No.
So I'll be one of those people that says no. When I listen to podcasts, I don't listen to true crime. What do I listen to?
That's here we go. This
I
is the
think I
question
listen
now.
to just a smattering of things, just for all over. I'm all over the map. I don't really have a. Maybe I'm not developed enough to.
Well, no, I think what you're describing is something, and I'd certainly identify with that because I'm listening across the board to these podcasts. So there are the national ones. There's just ones that are sort of localized to a particular interest of mine. I had a podcast on the screen just before we started about how to improve your audio techniques. So
okay.
Any interest that you have. And Dr. Hackett said this too. Any interest, there's something for you out there in the podcast world. And as a matter of fact, we go even further, and we're on YouTube at Columbus Television, so look that up. But the idea is that if you have something you have to fix, you have to replace, you have to do some repair work, you can find a video on it.
That is true.
If that faucet is leaking, there's a video on your model, your brand and model of the faucet that's leaking, and somebody's going to help you out.
Actually, I can attest to that. This last Sunday, I was watching the video on the bathroom Moan faucet that leaks.
Yes.
So just to make sure, before
I
took
just
it apart,
I
I
threw
knew
that
exactly
out
what it was
randomly,
gonna be.
but
I'm not
It's
kidding you.
true.
I
Sunday.
absolutely threw it randomly,
It's
but
true.
that happened, and that is it's very true in so many cases. So we're trying to get the videos out and get people in the conversation about it. But I know other people will just use that to kind of zero in on something they need information about. Is on-demand learning. And then what happens is that with the podcast, it's more the entertainment. I'm curious about what people think about certain topics, what people are really, what their background, how it comes out, and personalities, and just interested in human behavior in general with a couple of 3, 4 degrees and interest in these things a little bit. But it's fascinating that podcasts are coming on real strong. So we're going to try a true crime podcast. So what you two have done today is really bring us to realizing that with your interest, Shatul, not so much your husband, but with the true crime genre, that we need to know more about it and see if we can get right here in Columbus, Georgia, a true crime podcast. What do you think?
I think that would be fantastic. You know, I think that I can't give you a story of a case that I really, really liked. I can tell you this, though. I think that something you could do immediately that I think would pique a lot of people is what you're talking about doing right now. Start digging into these personality disorders, and I'll tell you why. When
Yes,
I'm getting
all right,
my
go ahead.
hair did, when
Yes.
I'm out in public talking to people, you know what I hear a lot about? Everybody has taken a Psychology 101 class
Yes.
that's ever gone to college, even
Yes.
for a little bit, right? And everybody knows somebody that's got some sort of a personality disorder.
Oh, and
Everybody.
it's never them, by the way. If you
It's
may ever
always
notice,
somebody.
it's always somebody else. I've learned that.
It's everybody knows somebody that is a blank. Fill it in.
Yes.
And what if you started doing something like that? I think that's where you're really delving into the beginnings of what we're calling true crime. Because in all of these real life stories, there truly is somebody, diagnosed or undiagnosed, but there
Right.
is truly somebody with a massive personality disorder or some sort of a mental illness that's untreated that's
Yes.
really dealing with this.
Yes,
Many
I
of
think
these
you're
deal
right.
with either suicides or apparent suicides that end up not being suicide, and that's the dum kind of moment, you
Right,
know,
right.
when all the family's really finding stuff out about people.
Well,
But-
and people think they know other people much better than they do.
yeah.
So they attribute things to other people. We call it projection. You kind of
Yeah.
project something in you onto another person. But the idea of this attribution that we give some others this bad stuff that we're not able to sort of manage in ourselves. But the Cougar Dunning effect is one of the videos
Yeah.
that we talked.
I would
we did that.
love to hear that.
Well, we did a video on Got Therapy with Dan Rose on iTunes, on YouTube. And what we were talking about is that we rate ourselves much better on average across the board on everything, driving, whatever you can find, but not so much on everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, look at all those bad drivers out there. Oh, but not me.
Not
Right.
me.
So yeah, there's a lot of that working.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying in the notion of personality. the personality quirks, but not only that they trend toward something more dangerous or something more antisocial. And then the personality disorders like the psychopaths and the antisocial personalities and those guys that really commit horrible crimes.
Well,
not just, but what we're
yeah.
seeing though is that there's also a continuum, there's a range where people trend toward some of these very dangerous sort of behaviors and attributes, and they'll make your life miserable.
Well, that's
because they're
those-
out to
yeah.
do something for themselves, and they can't regulate that in many ways.
No, and you know what though? Truly, it's not so much these psychopaths that you see committing the more insidious crimes. You know, the psychopaths, you see them, you deal with them, or you don't. But it's not so. It's more of these latent narcissists that you see often that are making people's lives hell. That's what I think is the train wreck that you see. 90% of the population that are just, they can't turn their head away. It's like, oh my God, that sounds like, you know, so and so that I know.
Right.
It's
We all can identify.
It's the
Yeah, that's it.
identification that I think it's that almost that voyeurism that's out there. If you're really looking for that immediate audience, you know, it's almost like you've got it at your fingertips between the two of you.
Right.
You can be talking about it.
That's it. Well, I appreciate that, and the idea that. Yeah, don't we all need to be? And I've been trying to wave this flag, and Dr. Hackett and I talked about it on Talk with Mike and Tom podcast. That we got to show some more empathy. We've got to look at it from the other person's point of view. We've got to take inventory on ourselves. Let's try to be a little more gracious. Let's try to be a little more kind. Let's try to connect with other people, give people the benefit of the doubt. Okay, do that.
That's
by
a
the
nice
way.
day
Do
podcast.
that. That's right. Keep that one. But then we've got the other folks who are sort of pushing our buttons, and people know. And with the lack of conscience, no conscience, the lack of the ability to empathize and see it from another person's point of view, the psychopath, which we're going to talk about coming up on this podcast, is really something we should all know. We should know about it, because you may come in contact with that person, and what do you do? Because they may take advantage of you.
Cut
by the way,
ties, yeah.
cut and run. There we go. All right. Well, let's. Thank you so much, Atul, for coming in. Greg, thank you
That's
guys
been so
for
much
being
fun.
here.
Thank you.
Hey man, this is an awesome place, by the way. I've
well-
never seen it. It's my first time on a microphone. I can hear myself so crisp.
All right, there we go. That's
so cool.
well,
Very professional.
it's
It is.
been great having you guys in here today. I want to thank also Dr. Hackett, our executive producer, making this thing work behind the scenes.
Thank you.
And listen, you guys come back. I need to see you both again in the studio. And until then, we'll see you next time.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Because you know, taking back and your idea of education, there was a big push a while back for data-driven decision making.
Right,
Those were the key words.
right.
Sort of the buzzwords in education, probably in other places as well,
Yep.
maybe even in government in some ways. But we need that data, we need the information in order to make a decision. That's where it fits. And then we've got to have lawmakers and people in government and the support of the general population to say this is an important issue. This is something we need. We'll all be better off if we tackle it and come out with a good solution for it. I don't think we're there with this tribalism and nationalism and other things that are going on right now.
Well, here's the other thing. The solutions are hard work.
Yes, they are.
Teaching children is a job that requires a tremendous amount of commitment and dedication and energy. Addressing the homeless situation, it requires that same kind of commitment and tremendous amount of energy. And, I think sometimes people may be a little afraid of those kinds of commitments. At the same time, growing crops in a drought requires a tremendous amount of commitment and energy. So, we take for granted that, whoever's doing the work of farming is just going to have to suck it up and have insurance to deal with a drought, and come back strong. Well, you know what? I get that that's, if we're not successful there, we don't eat. But at the same time, if we're not successful with educating our young, then we don't have a strong economy. And if we're not successful in addressing mental health in a homeless situation, then who are we really as human beings?
Yes, that's
So-
a great question. Who are we, and what do we want, and how do we flourish in life? What is this? I mean, it's almost one of those basic questions, and I think he sort of addressed this at the beginning of the book, but I've heard others talk about this idea of really, it's an existential question. What are we here for? What do we do with our life, and so forth? You know, he mentioned at one point the goal of maximizing human flourishing, life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, and the richness of experience. So we've got this life to live, and we probably should do a better job thinking about how we want it to be, and then acting on that and moving in that direction. Those are kind of tough questions for a lot of people who are just day to day. We're trying to figure out, you know, how to pay the bills and how to move to the next thing, but I think that those are the big questions like that, and the ones you mentioned about mental health and homelessness and the problem with that, and coming up with a solution, coming up with a plan to deal with that so that all people can flourish and have a great life experience. Why not? Look at the trends that he's got in his book. Everything's getting better, so to speak, in quotes. But why aren't more people enjoying it, and why are we sort of stuck in some misery somewhere? Big questions.
My only response has to do with me personally. And this is sort of a bellwether month and year for me for a lot of reasons. But you had asked me, I had mentioned to you earlier that I had been on a retreat. It was sort of a personally self-imposed retreat. I didn't go anywhere. I just hung around the house, did some reading.
I really, when you said retreat in your text, and I really thought, wow, he's with a group up on a mountain.
Up in the Rockies,
and you're doing these kind of things. But it's even better than that. This was a retreat you took for yourself, and I think that's a great idea.
And I just wanted to reflect on some things. And one of the outcomes of that, I sort of looked back at my life and looked forward too. And I found that the times when I felt the most alive and the times that I was the most effective were not the times when I was about me, myself. They were the times when I was about a mission, or about I was about Columbus State University, or I was about the Phoenix City Schools, or I was about the Alexander City Schools, or I was about my family. Those times when I was about me and what did I get and what was going to be meaningful to me, I found that I just sort of lost my way. So that's a gut check. And every day,
we all need one.
Every day, I think it's a battle to make that realization for me. I don't know if that has anything to offer about a lot of these things.
No, I think it's great. And to take the time out, I guess that is kind of an issue that, well, I wanted to say something about reading a good book, or reading a book like this that has so much information on it, and we're reading less. Mm-hmm. Oh, boy. That's kind of
another podcast, isn't it?
That's a whole nother thing. But I do think you're on the right track, where you take a break, you do some inventory on what you want, where you're at, what you're going to do. Don't we all need to do that? And I'm not so sure everybody, the Joe walking up and down the streets doing that. I want to wave the flag out there and say, hey, stop and think, reflect, be introspective, think about the future, think about the past, figure out your next steps. And it's not about you. It's about how you can help other people. And as soon as we get everybody on that train, I think we're going to be better off.
In full disclosure, though,
anyway.
When I was working full-time and had a lot of responsibilities on my plate, it was a lot more difficult. As an old retired professor, I actually have the time to do this. So I'm not advocating it necessarily as, hey, I did it, and that kind of thing.
No, but I think it does make sense, and I'm all
Yeah.
about folks taking time out to really think about what they want and how they're going to get it, what's stopping them from getting it, making good decisions that not only affect themselves but affecting others. So we try to do that in our counseling efforts, and I think it's something that we probably need to do as individuals.
Story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today.
Well, I'm glad you said that now that we started recording, because the fact that we just had lunch at a brand new restaurant here in downtown Columbus.
Vertigo.
And it was Vertigo. So what did you think of the experience? I mean, it did have a bit of it was different.
It was disorienting. I felt some vertigo.
Okay.
I think so it's aptly named.
Well,
Even
maybe
though I
this-
asked the server initially, what is the significance, I found that out very quickly.
Right. And the answer to that was?
Well, first, if you think you're eating a certain kind of cuisine, it's a mashup.
It's a fusion.
A fusion, that's right. That's the term they use.
That's the new term now. So that means a little bit of everything,
Little
kind
bit
of
of
combined
everything.
on whoever the chef or the restaurant owner decides will go together. That's what they put together.
Well, they fused beets into my salad.
Okay. Well,
And I thought I'd go with it because I hadn't had beets since I was a child, and I always thought I don't like beets, and I thought, how do I know?
that's
really?
right. That sounds like
That
a kid,
was
by the way, too.
45
When you say,
years ago.
I don't like beets.
Yeah,
All right, there
I
we
don't
go.
like them, but I sort of dug them today, and they're very healthy. So my fusion had fused beets with feta cheese. That was
Yes.
different.
And some hummus in there, I
Had
thought. Yeah.
hummus, pita,
Yeah.
lettuce, and you had the
I had the
bowl.
rice bowl with a lot of different vegetables in there, and what turned out to be some hibachi steak, as opposed to the chicken that I ordered, which was a little bit different, but I was okay with it. New restaurant, okay. I'm not going to send it back because it looked good and it tasted good. So more power to the Vertigo restaurant here in downtown Columbus.
So here on Talk with Mike and Tom, TMT, on CMG, that's Columbus Media Group, Uptown Columbus, First Avenue, we're talking about a subject, and you warned me to set up my microphone so that I did not pop my peas.
That was very good. I like the way you just went through that process and actually used the words. If we decide not to use any words that start with the letter P, we wouldn't have much of a conversation.
We wouldn't have a conversation
so we've
at
got to
all.
pop our P's. Well, maybe we got to pronounce the P's, but not pop the P's.
Pronounce and be very mindful of any P words.
Well, I was watching this group play down at the Loft down here in Columbus, Georgia, down on Broadway, and I noticed they had a jazz singer. And as a matter of fact, I think you might have been there that night, but certainly the last time I went, I noticed that the singer on stage with the microphone there, when she started to really get loud and belt out the sound, she would move back from the microphone.
Very elegant.
And
She was some more singer now.
yeah, listen, and she, was able to really control what came through the speakers for the audience and didn't blow out the audience because she was on the mic. If she'd have really belted that out,
Fabulous.
it would have been a problem for all of us there.
On every level, she was great. Technically great. She had a great ear. She was engaging. And, oh, by the way, I had sat next to her before she performed, and I had no idea she was going to be performing. She was just really relaxed and all about the party. And then she got up and she
did her thing,
leveled the place.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do jazz singing much better than she did it.
Yeah, she was great, and that idea that I don't know why I focused on the way she was pulling back and going forward to the microphone, showed her in total control of how that sound was going to be heard, which is unusual. Most people don't pay too much attention to a microphone. They usually stay at a static distance and maybe do some things and not be aware that they're coming across too hot or not strong enough.
Well,
that
we've
kind of thing.
heard a lot of bands that had first a bad PA to start with that was distorting and just loud and too many highs, and then the singer just trying to overcome a terrible PA
Right.
by not practicing safe singing.
Safe singing, okay,
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
new one for me.
Yeah.
But I think you're right about that, and particularly when we're down here on Broadway
Yep.
and on a Friday night, and they've blocked off the streets, and we got a band
Yep.
playing live outside.
Yep.
Which is the acoustics are always going to be iffy, sketchy,
Permanent
So,
echo.
Too much of this, not enough of that,
Yep.
and it's not going to be mixed well. And so there's this overcompensation that happens sometimes with the singer. The mic's not loud enough, and they have to really belt it out. It's a wonder some of those concerts make it, but people tend to enjoy it. So more power to them. So.
Well, I think it depends on how much of the different kiosks you've participated or sought the libation from those. Anyway,
Yeah,
if
there you
if
go.
you've been out there since 4:30 buying beer, then
Right.
by the time the band starts at 6, you're ready for whatever. And if it sounds bad, well, it sounds good to you.
Everybody sounds good now.
That's right.
Well, interesting trip over there for lunch today, I have to say, the Vertigo Restaurant
Yeah.
on 12th. That's 12th,
Yeah,
right?
Uptown Columbus, Georgia. Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
down here just
Good
around
stuff.
the block from CMG Studios here
Yeah.
where we're at today. And
Yeah.
we're about to start a podcast, it sounds like. Maybe
Well,
we've already started. I'm
Well,
not
we
sure.
were going to take on Steven Pinker, the Canadian psychologist who works at Harvard.
Yeah. So, cognitive psychologist at Harvard, well known, written a lot of books, has a very interesting take on things. And I guess we're going to go there.
Well, I always
right?
think of Pinker as one of the young rising stars, but he's not a kid. I mean, he's a year older than I am, and I'm certainly not a kid. I just turned 64, so now you know about Pinker.
Oh,
He's
now
65.
we go. All right,
Yeah.
so there you go. Well, he has the hair of a 45-year-old.
Yeah,
so I
he
think
has
that's
it going
what,
on.
Some
Yeah.
people says he's got that, but very interesting guy. I'm quite interested in his books and his take on things. And when I think probably the most famous book was the Better Angels of Our Nature.
Yeah,
which was a quote from Abraham Lincoln, I believe.
That's what started us on Pinker, really. Although
Yeah.
I'd read him on and I can't remember the name of the book, but it's about how a mind develops. I just saw the book the other day. I thought I need to reread it, but he makes some wonderful points.
Yeah, I mean the first book we just mentioned. I mean that was really kind of a tipping point. Although I think that's a Gladwell book, so we'll come back to
Yeah,
that
right,
at another
right.
point. But Pinker's book may have been kind of a tipping point in that he brought out I'll generalize here, but basically that things have gotten better in our world, despite the fact that we hear news that is terrible. And
Yeah.
of course, newscasts that's their job, I suppose. Nobody's going to come on and say, hey, we're broadcasting from this country where there hasn't been a war in the last 30 years and everybody's happy. That's not going to play on the news. We're going to go with the disasters, with the horrors. And what happens is that people believe that's the way the world is because
Yeah.
they're getting inundated with news like that, where Pinker's book was really a sort of a milestone in this turnaround and acceptance with statistics and figures that basically show that we are doing better. We're having a better life than we ever had before, and there's a number of different chapters in that book, and even in the book that we'll talk about today, Enlightenment Now, his latest book, that there's a lot of evidence to say the world's gotten better.
Well-
And we need to figure out how to interpret that and what to do with it.
Well, and you know, it's funny, internet guy came to fix my internet modem this morning.
Okay.
And he and I got in the discussion about public education. His father is a principal, and of course I did that work for years.
Sure.
And, there's a current or a conventional wisdom that public education is failing us, failing our children.
Right. Somehow something's not working. We've put a lot of money into it. We've done a lot of changes, but other countries are sort of beating us out on all the statistics about education for some reason.
Well, I think, a lot of that goes to what your assessment is and what are you trying to assess. Oftentimes, those assessments don't assess the very things that make money for those of us in the U.S. 1, creativity. 2, innovation. That's not assessed by those assessments. But one of the statements he made to me, the reason we got into the discussion, he was in my home office working, and he saw that I was.
I'm sorry. Who is this?
The internet.
Oh, the internet.
The
guy.
internet repair guy.
I'm back with you now. Thanks.
Yeah. So he was in my home office working in there, and he said we got to the whole deal about me having been in education and done that, and he said, well, you know a lot about education with all that experience, and what I said to him was really. Education has changed so much over the 15 years when I was at Columbus State. And so it was more than 15 years ago where I was in public ed as far as K-12. And I said, what the teachers and administrators are doing now is light years, just like in any field, light years removed. And I was sort of thinking of that framed up in this podcast because so many of the things that are done that are being done in public education now, we just plain didn't do them back in those days. Or if we did, we took a stab at it. And I'll give you an example. Yeah. One of the issues we talked about was the idea of discipline and how we disciplined. And he said, well, when he was in school, they utilized corporal punishment, that kind of thing.
Get the paddle from the principal.
And I was in public education when that concept sort of changed. And what it made us do was really rethink how we educated students on consequences and how things happen and what expected behavior was. And I think having some of the consequences we'd had earlier maybe made us lazy, or at least lazy in the sense that we said, well, if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for you.
Right. And it was a simple and a quick fix to a problem without much thought to it. Then, yes, we have a problem, this is the discipline, and now we're out and going on about our business.
And despite the tremendous horror stories that have taken places in some schools, and they have, recently you have these issues pop up with violent behavior and that kind of thing, the actual statistics show that public schools are so much safer than they were maybe even than 10, 15 years ago. And one of the things that occurs to me is that when I was in school as a kid, we fought at recess all the time. It was just part of recess. Well, by the time I was at the end of my career as a middle school principal, when we had a fight on campus, it was a very unusual, disruptive kind of thing.
Okay.
And we were hypersensitive to it. So in that sense, some of the things that Pinker is going to say in this book, Enlightenment Now, it kind of has that kind of wisdom. In other words, you go to the data, and the data show that, well, the things we think about a lot of times may not really be occurring.
Right. Well, we're almost we're given this information through where? Our newspapers, our media, our television, and of course now we're getting media through our social media, our devices that we carry with. Everybody has a cell phone. Everybody has a smartphone. You're getting information there, information and what's going on in the world around you at all times. It's hard to get off the grid, as some people have talked about. So there's that particular level of complexity, I guess, that we have to deal with, that we're all in the know, whereas before we're not so much.
Yep.
And we're kind of focused on our own little world. Now we're connected across the board in so many ways. And you have things to sort of reflect on, that your behavior may not be accepted in another situation. And now you're having to measure all of that. And what are the rules? And so we were fed a lot of information along the way, but now it's an explosion in a way that we have to really kind of work with and figure out what's going on.
It's sort of the vertigo idea, in other words, that you have so much data, you're really disoriented. It's hard to get your bearings.
And I think one of the issues there is just that management of that that universe of data that's at you every day from the waking moment when you pick up your phone or turn on the television or whatever, read the paper, whatever that routine is for you, that we just I'm not sure that we need to that we haven't figured out a way to sort it out. Is it we've had a show on other podcast about confirmation bias. Do we hear what we want to hear that fits with our beliefs? And that's acceptable to us, and other things are not acceptable to us. So that's just one in many kinds of issues that we have to resolve, because there's so much information, and it's not always what we believe. So we're getting different information. I think that's at the basis of where Pinker has been going. He's saying in certain ways, I paraphrase, maybe I'm making this up myself, that you're not accurate on what you thought. Here's some data that shows that you're wrong, basically.
Yeah.
And that there's another way to look at it. That's a disruptive effect I think this is having on us as well.
Well, I think the push for him is the whole idea that we can indulge in better living through science,
right?
That technology has the answer, those kinds of things, that most of the progress humankind has made, and a lot of it since the 1800s. In other words, if you trace the arc in so many areas, safety, poverty,
substance, food, riches, etc.
Yeah, for going back to really at the beginning, 101 AD, if you look at the arc of improvement all the way up until certainly the 1700s, and in most cases the 1800s, you don't see much of an arc. And then suddenly the arc is extreme. And then in the midway through the 20th century, it is exponential, almost straight up the curve.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in other words, you see these things like life expectancy in just a few years doubles. And that's worldwide. That's not just in what we tend to think of as industrial nations, the G7 type nations, or whatever they're calling it now,
and I think the lifespan, you mentioned that as well, that just not that long ago, it was 30 years.
That's
People
right.
were living to the ripe old age of 30, and now we're pushing 80, 90, and more in lots of ways. So, there's some evidence, and I think, coming across this evidence, reading it, and trying to, make sense out of it, does cause a bit of disruption to the way that you think. It's, first of all, wait, that's not what I thought it was, so I'm going to push back on that.
Yeah.
And then as you begin to think about it, hey, wait a minute, there's so much evidence to say that this is correct. Maybe I need to change my tune on this.
Well, at the same time, he takes to task what he calls the progressophobes. In other words, those who fear progress because it will create unanticipated consequences that will ultimately destroy humankind. Here's a good example: the whole idea of industrialization and how, especially in terms of carbon footprint, the whole idea that those things that have really lessened poverty, and this isn't just in a few countries, it is now globally. In fact, countries are more likely to be prosperous than to be poverty-stricken.
Right.
Whereas if you look back in the United States at around the turn of the century, the percentage of people who had any prosperity at all was very small. Now, globally, that percentage has increased vastly, and it continues to be increasing. However,
Okay.
at the same time, you have this issue with a tremendous carbon footprint, and that seems to be increasing and creating climate change and that kind of thing. And that's something that's an issue out there that really needs to be given some thought and actually some action. So, but he says that the answers there are like very similar to the answers to lack of longevity, and that those answers lie in science and technology. In other words, the Enlightenment.
Yeah, which evidently started the first paper I think I read in one of the chapters. There was 1785, the topic about enlightenment in the 1700s. So, yeah, I think also there's just this this claim in the book about a pushback, particularly in things like ideologies and political and even religion, that there's a idea of belonging to a group and believing the sort of the credos, the different guidelines that you should believe if you're in a particular group, and that keeps you from accepting some of the things about progress and so forth. So you may disagree with some because of the group that you're in.
At the same time, I sort of read that with a little bit of amusement, and I'm always amused. I love to read Pinker. I think he's a wonderful writer, but I'm always amused at his writing because at the same time, his point, I think, is, well, if you have these dogmatic religions or quasi-religions or ideologies that prevent you from buying into the whole Enlightenment thing, then you're really working against humankind. And at the same time, I'm thinking, yeah, but hey, bro, you have your belief in science, technology, and the Enlightenment, and as I look at it, it sort of reads like, I hate to say it, a religion. So,
Yeah.
There's an irony there.
Be careful
Although-
where you point the finger. There may be more pointing back at you, as they say.
But that's not to say that those points are off base. But
Right.
but he also has an ideological approach, and it's the total belief in the can-do, science will solve all issues, and but he's got a lot of data to back it up.
Yeah, I found it interesting that it was about being rational a lot. In several chapters, they talked about just rational thinking can help you through the problem.
Yeah.
What is your best option in this moment? And also taking that onto a grander scheme for some of the problems we have worldwide. But yeah, you can solve things in that way, and certain political beliefs may interfere with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, early on, I think he made the push for more education, better education. What'd you think about that idea of how he was talking about you, in a way, you're just not educated enough if you can't use rational thinking and figuring out problems. It's sort of threw a rock there at education as we know it.
Well, it goes back to the discussion I was having with our contractor this morning, the internet contractor, and the idea that what really has a tremendous effect on what students do as far as behavior at school
Right.
is by educating them. And the longer I was in it, the more I came to believe this. It's almost counterintuitive, but I really strongly believe that the more you showed students what an outcome would be from a behavior that wasn't desirable, the more a student would say, I just think I need to do better. And you would see a drop in, say, undesirable behaviors, fighting, disruption of class, that kind of thing. And there are other things that feed into that too, but just the fact that you sit down and discuss with a student what the outcomes of his or her behavior is going to be, has an incalculable effect on that behavior. It's almost like I log my food every day into a food app, into a food diary.
Okay.
And I never made any kind of decision to really change my diet. I never said I'm going to eat this, not eat that.
Right.
But when I started logging things in, the choice I made was often, do I want meat on this salad today? No. I don't feel like I need it. Now, if I've worked out really hard, maybe I need the protein, but today, so I could have said, I'm going vegan. I never did that.
Right.
But just the awareness.
You were letting the data sort of, through osmosis or some way that we don't know of. But anyway, you were exposed to that data, and it helped you make the decision in the moment, even though you weren't tracking it, or like Pinker makes a chart of everything there. You do have an app, and you're using that to be more informed about your decision making.
And then once you have that awareness, you're constantly asking the question, do I really need this bag of chips, for instance?
Right.
Now, in fairness, I have to have full disclosure and say there's some days where I just hide from that app. So I don't even want to know. But I think that's like everybody. But the whole idea of education, I think clearly that's.
So is it true to say that the more educated you are, maybe the better decisions you're going to make, or is that going too far? I think it depends on what kind of education it is. And I think I certainly think being educated as far as how to innovate, how to solve problems, how to find information, that's really important. If it's education that indoctrinates you, well, all that does is create a filter that everything's filtered through, and you're unwilling to look at data, because or even if you do look at data, if the data doesn't fit what's in your filter, then you don't. Confirmation bias, as we talked about on another show. And that idea is that if it's uncomfortable if it doesn't fit into what you believe. And I think that's that may be the moment where you have to ask yourself some serious questions about when something is confronted what you've always believed. Because let's face it, sort of believing in some ideology or political kind of thing, whatever that is a comfort. You're with a group, you're all agreeing, and boy, there's a nice comfort in that. And who wants to give that up, to be the outlier? One more book, I think that's a Gladwell book again too, so we're out there outside of the group, and you're kind of alone at that point. And so you've got to do some reconciling with this. Do I remain a part of the group, or am I on the periphery? Where do I go? What am I doing now when that happens? And I think we're kind of going, I think we tend to, somebody had the statistical term that means regression to the mean, that this notion is that we fall back to what we're comfortable with, and we're right there in that 50 percentile. But I'm not sure. Again, it's disruptive to a certain extent, but I think that's kind of a part of education, is it not? Yeah, well, and the other aspect that kind of comes to mind is, just because I don't believe something doesn't make it fake news. In other words, I don't believe what you're saying, so what you're saying is fake news. Well, if that's the case, then I'm always looking at things through a prism, through my own filter, a filter of my own devising, or that's been created for me by my environment or my upbringing, and I'm not really taking a wide enough view in order to get all the data I need to solve problems. Yeah, so. I think that's part of it. This notion of being exposed to new ways of thinking, or in this case, the data that is telling us what we believed before is no longer the way to look at it. We're living longer. There's more food out there. There's more technology. Everything is getting better on a broad level. it's something we have to grapple with. On the other hand, we're also in communities. I mean, some of this book was really talking about this in a national way, in a global way.
That's right.
But does it affect your locale, your small community, even your small family in some ways that it may not fit into as easily as he's making that it should?
When people answer surveys and they answer about their own situation, their own prosperity, their own community, their own safety,
right,
they tend to be very optimistic. When they answer about safety or prosperity or any of a number of issues in terms of everyone, they tend to be very negative. And that is something that holds true over and over again. And when we first noticed it, we noticed it in education, where a survey would say, rate education on a scale, and people would, or education in the U.S. on a scale,
right,
they'd really downrate it, right?
Sure they would.
On the same survey, you'd say, but rate your education at your community school, and invariably, and it held true across all schools, across every kind of socioeconomic group.
I think I know where you're going. If
it's my school,
well,
my school's pretty doggone good. Miss Jones is the greatest teacher. We love our principal. They keep real good order, but discipline in all the other schools has gone to hell. So that tends to be it. When you look at surveys, and I've done a lot of surveys.
Right.
You really got to question a whole lot of things. For instance, how did you ask the question? To whom did you ask the question? How was it framed up? And if you don't have anything like that to sort of cut both sides to see where people are coming from, so it can't be true that everybody's school is good, but everybody's school is also bad, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I got to say something about surveys. It's and what we learned, and I taught a research course at one point in the programs there, in our graduate programs. The idea that a self-survey or a self-report, turns out it's the least reliable, least valid form of information. Sorry, it just doesn't hold up. And so what happens in these surveys sometimes, I think they do a plus or minus kind of notion. If you see it on TV, you see that a lot. Well, that's just not enough, because what's happening is this is at best a correlation with other ideas. It's never something that you can use from an experimental point of view, which is the opposite of that, or further valid and reliable ways to gather information, where you have a control group and you can make comparisons.
That's
and then
right.
you can attribute cause. Don't mean to get in a research lesson here, but the idea of asking me about how good a driver I am and how bad a driver everyone else is, I got news for you. I'm pretty good, and they're not so.
Right.
And that's true across the board, and that's that confirmation bias and various types of bias that we have in our thinking. And who's to say who's objective and who has the absolute right answer in this? And I think there's just a lot of question marks about surveys and how people think, and everybody thinks everybody else is bad and we're good. So it made your point very well, I think, in this conversation.
Sort of goes with what George Carlin always said about driving. Anybody that drives slower than you is an idiot. Anybody who drives faster than you is a maniac, right? So that's a sort of a self-report. That your framework
great.
is self-reported,
Anytime we can throw Carlin in here for a joke, I'm good for that.
So one thing that Pinker talked, or two things that Pinker talked about, and I sort of want to explore these, because I think as people who aspire to move forward, to move humankind forward, to make us safer, to make us more prosperous, to make us healthier, those kinds of things. The twin issues of nuclear proliferation, and this sounds like I'm coming at this from a 60s standpoint especially. I'm going to go to the two things. the nuclear proliferation in terms of weapons. And then the other big issue is the whole issue of climate change and where we are now in terms of the fact that at least the general perception now is that, there's so much carbon in the atmosphere that that's contributing to climate change, and these things need to be addressed in a very positive way. So, you think about Pinker, and Pinker's approach would be first to look at climate change and to say that, there's been a marked move on as far as policy to work to lessen the carbon footprint, but at the same time, it's still increasing at a rate globally to where there's going to be some rather serious issues in the next 20, 30 years that impact us. And in fact, many scientists are saying those impact us now. So
I think you're right about that. We're not, but it's interesting that the rate of all of this information is exponential. We had Dr. Abraham Georgian here not long ago talking about the acceleration of all of this information and the technology that's moving with the virtual reality, with the augmented reality, and artificial intelligence. Anyway, that's moving. That's going to outpace our ability to really make sense of what we have in the moment, much less what we're having down weeks and months and years to come. So I think it's a real problem.
So that becomes even more critical as we're sifting through all that data to ascertain what kinds of policies need to be developed. And they can't just be developed in one or two countries. In other words, the U.S. policies toward reducing carbon footprint have been very aggressive to do things that address this. Mm-hmm. Other countries are moving in that direction, some countries faster than others. Pinker's assertion would be that one of the problems, and particularly in the area of climate change, is that the things we do to address this really won't have as much effect as the one or two big things we need to do. For instance, his point on carbon footprint, and there's a lot of disagreement on this, but his point is if companies have to pay in terms of taxes or fees or
carbon
fines,
tax,
a carbon tax, and that gets relayed, obviously would be relayed onto the consumer, that suddenly that would change things, and that's a role government could take. Even though it would be an unpopular position, it would be a very leaderly position. But he says in order to really address things in a very large sort of way, you have to make policy decisions that may be unpopular in the short term. And that, by the way, that revenue generated by governments could be defrayed to finding other ways, other alternate forms of energy and that kind of thing.
Important.
So the other point he made about climate change is there is a tremendous fear about using nuclear energy.
Oh, yeah, very much so, yeah.
And yet he says when you go to the data, it's some of the safest energy we have. Coal is absolutely one of the worst. Just the act of pulling it out of the earth is so unsafe for the workers and has killed so many people. So when you look at it long term, but there is if it has nuke attached to it,
right,
then it sort of stirs
we're
that
suddenly back in the 50s.
Yeah, it stirs that progressive phobe. And you know the other issue and the other issue that he raised that's a real genuine specter on the world stage is the proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Right.
And that would take equally an aggressive perspective. In other words, that the people who own the most nuclear weapons, notably Russia and the United States, and to a lesser extent China, would have to agree in a world where other people are developing nuclear weapons to lessen their arsenals,
Right.
so that and to commit to no first strike. You know, the United States has never committed to no first strike. In other words,
Right.
it could be that you would attack an ally and all options are on the table. That's what we say as a nation and have traditionally said. Well, when you say that, other people who have nuclear weapons are like, well, you know, I don't want them to launch their nukes and take out our nukes, and then we lose the war. And so what that does is it exacerbates the spiral. So it's ironic that 20 years ago we had these discussions, and the ones having the discussions were Premier Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, and actually started moving us in what is a very progressive and liberal direction. But now we seem to have forgotten that.
Well, I think that is a very interesting point, because right now it does seem like things are sort of upside down in a lot of ways. Some of us would agree that this point in time in the political world and the government and so forth. You know, I remember not long ago reading Thomas Friedman's book about a flat Earth, and not in the conspiracy theory idea,
Right.
but the idea that we were all connected,
Yeah.
that we were all one family on this blue ball out in space here, and that we had to work together as across countries. Countries had to come together on that. Well, we've taken the opposite tack right now, it seems like, that the tribalism and the nationalism and so forth, which I find is counterproductive in a lot of these things that Pinker's talking about. But going back to something you said a moment ago about the idea that to make change on an individual level or at a small level doesn't affect this eco problem, this climate problem that we have, that the big corporations, the governments have to do some work in that, whether it's a carbon tax on the individual or on the companies, and taking more responsibilities for that. It's almost as if this is a tug of war with these ideas, that there's some ways that we have to make the planet better so that people can live on it, our children, our grandchildren, future generations, whereas we've got people taking the opposite tack with that. There's nothing to worry about. So it seems to me that there's a lot of working through, and this is a pivotal point now, I think, that we've gotten ourselves to make some decisions about some of these bigger issues. And then another thing that you had mentioned, just brought up a second ago, I'm sorry, I'm recounting some of this because it seemed to me to be important, that the idea of nuclear power is safer than we thought, but we associate it with these nuclear weapons and so forth, which is very dangerous and civilization-killing kinds of issues.
And another issue we have to address.
And we have to address that. And, you know, in the news, and this will, hopefully, I don't know if it makes my point, but the idea that there's a particular country out there that's in the news that stated in the last couple of days they want a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And these are not people we can probably trust very much. Right. So all of these kinds of concerns, which I think, I guess my point is that I thought we had these things under control and we were moving in a progressive way, in quotes.
New World Order.
That we were
the 90s.
We were working through these.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're not. We're right there facing these issues, probably more so than we ever have before. And there's a lot of resistance for cleaning up the world, cleaning up our climate, taking care of people, doing all these things that just I'm not sure I understand why that there's so much opposition and resistance to these ideas that seem to make sense, but I don't know.
You know, it's interesting. I sort of came from a background that tended to have just my family tended to have a lot of conservative views, and as a school administrator, I tended to have some conservative views. But the older I get and the longer I'm around and the more I observe human behavior, the more I feel that, there are some big issues that are critical issues. If you just look at data and you just look at potential for catastrophe, that there are some issues that need to be addressed and they need to be addressed immediately. And it's sort of counterintuitive. In other words, that it's similar to the how important is education? Well, it's extremely important.
Yes.
Well, how important is cooperation and collaboration? Well, it's critically important. So when we do things like, say, the United Nations is ineffective, well, it's only as effective as we allow it to be, as across the globe. And those kinds of things take leadership, but they also take, and I think Pinker's point would be this, that the answers are out there, but we have to be honest about what the challenges are. In other words, we need to lay the challenges on the table and then say, okay, what are some ways we can address these challenges in ways that still honor everybody? There's also a point of view that says that, well, human beings are basically self-serving, and that if you belong to a certain group, that you are out to destroy the other group. I think if you were to look at data and really be honestly look at data, the majority of people just want to raise their families and be prosperous. How do we get to that? And those are huge challenges. But at the same time, huge challenges bring about huge leaders. And for us to be, as you said, engaged in sort of a global nationalistic approach, and everybody's looking out for number one, nobody's really looking out for number one, because that path leads to just allowing the problems to fester and get worse until suddenly, there would be an immediate need to address it, but then would it be a little on the late side? I think about, and somebody else said this wasn't in the Pinker book, but we face a lot of things that are similar to, what if an asteroid was headed toward Earth?
All right.
If an asteroid were headed toward Earth, I think the debate between, well, it's not really headed toward Earth, yeah, it is headed toward Earth, you're an idiot, that kind of debate, or one country saying, well, that's the problem of the U.S., and the U.S. saying, well, that's Canada's problem, Canada saying that's Russia's problem. Well, what would ultimately happen, and human nature being what it is, everyone would get together and hold hands and try to figure out a technological way of addressing it and pool their resources.
Yes, it would take that catastrophic event of civilization coming to an end to avoid this thing. Or I guess we have to call Bruce Willis and get some of those guys up there to plant a nuclear weapon on it. Sorry, that's a movie reference. But it's real interesting that we find ourselves in this world now where all this media is out there. Half of it's we're trying to make sense out of it because it doesn't make sense. We're wondering if it's a fact, or there are different alternative facts. Really, I find that kind of difficult to comprehend. But there's so much conspiracy stuff out there with these ideologies that people are following in politics, particularly, where you just automatically doubt what's right in front of you. At some point, a fact is actually true. It's not a belief about a fact. It's not, I believe this fact to be this way. No, it's a fact, whether you believe it or not, is actually true. And I think sometimes we're bombarded in this social media and the news and everything now with information that tends to make us doubt. Who do we believe? Who are leaders that we truly believe are doing the right thing? And as soon as you go, yes, this is the person I can believe in, somebody else says, well, not that guy or not that person. So that's a real confusing piece. And I think it's a sign of the times, really, where we're at.
Well, the first thing is I think one of the worst things that could have happened in American politics, and this is going to really sound off the wall, but just I'm going to track it, was the whole idea that we develop talking points. I think when you're unwilling as a leader to answer questions because you have a set of talking points on your desk that go with the ideology of the group that you belong to.
Yes, and you have to adhere to that.
Then what you end up doing is stop answering. You stop answering bona fide questions from people who are just concerned. So when I see town hall meetings, and so often I see when it's not a planted question, when it's a genuine genuine electrician from Columbus, Georgia, who raises his or her hand at a forum and asks a question, what are we going to do? It looks to me like that climate change is being exacerbated by how we process manufacturing. And the answer is either, well, that's that dumb party that's in power that creates the policies that make that happen, or the other answer is, that's not happening, that's fake news. Well, neither of those is an answer to a genuine question from a parent who just wants to see their children have a world to grow up in. And that's the first thing.
Yeah, that's a problem, because I think we're beginning to accept those dodges and that what the points are, and I will just stick to what I was going to say. Never interact in the moment, be in the moment with the person, and give a authentic and genuine response. That's out the door now. What's wrong with that? I'd like to see that come back.
Well, I think I think it's a lot about power, and politics has always been
money.
It's always been a rough and tumble endeavor and all that, but to cover everything over with the idea that politics are that the whole politic is just tough and you just have to fend for yourself out there, I think lets leaders off the hook a little bit. And I think leaders, and it's funny, I've been in leadership now. I'm a retired guy, but I've been in leadership roles my whole career. And, one of the things I thought of is ultimately what guides you as a leader. And it's to look out for the interests of the people who report to you, whether they believe what you believe or not.
Right.
To look out for the people in your care, whether they are, believe your particular ideology or not. And if you don't do that, then you're really failing as a leader. And so I would add to Pinker's points, and a lot of them are really good. The whole idea of science, technology. Yeah, I think the answers are out there. Sure. But the first thing, we have to define the issues. And somehow we need to understand that if you're a Republican, that the folks who are your brother or sister who's a Democrat just wants the same things for their children that you want. And if you live in the U.S., you have to understand that the majority of people in the world, that's all they want. Now, our leaders engaged in game theory and have their arms stacked, and are they making bad decisions? Well, I think ultimately there has to be an effort toward that, and to always come up with I'm going to play hardball with you. First, it doesn't make for good negotiation, and second, current negotiation theory talks a lot about not just win-win, but how can we, in a negotiation, and I'm talking about a sales type negotiation or a union type negotiation, how can I find out what your needs are, what my needs are, and how can we find a new way of addressing those? I think just to say we're going to compromise and have a win-win, I think that's a 1980s technology. I just think in a new millennium we can do better.
Well, I think you're right about that, and I'm hopeful. I'm the eternal optimist in so many ways, and I get it's getting whittled away at a little bit every day. It seems like. I was kind of curious too about the idea of corruption. He didn't have a chart on that. He didn't have a chapter on corruption. Is corruption like the rest of his charts, kind of going up? Are we seeing more corruption? People taking advantage of other people, taking advantage of the situation, trying to make money as a goal. He certainly talked about the haves and have-nots in this book as well. But on the idea of corruption, it sounds like it's getting better. Now, I need a chart from him to tell me that it's not, because I'm beginning to wonder all the conspiracy theories, the counter arguments for everything that comes out that you once thought was a sure fact. Now it's questionable. The earth is flat, or is it round? I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
I mean, we've got those people on the extremes that are making these points, and sure, it's easy to dismiss those, but then you've got the ones where you're not knowledgeable about and you kind of question it, and then the corrupt person may take advantage of that. If I'm out to get something over everyone else, regardless, that makes for a very nasty scenario, and I'm kind of wondering about whether we are leveling out at corruption, going up, or is getting less and less. I'd like to see that chart.
Well, it's hard to say. The researcher in me wants to react this way,
Yeah.
that there's a curve in human behavior, in any kind of behavior, in any kind of social or scientific
Right.
construct. There's a curve. And that on that curve, you're going to have everything from one end of the curve where folks are saints.
Right.
And you're going to have the other end of the curve where folks are nothing but sinners. And you're going to have the middle part of the curve, people fall somewhere in the one standard deviation or another,
Right.
plus or minus the mean, right? That's just, and if you ever actually have the data on anything and plot it, unless you're treating it some way, that's what you're going to have. So my guess is that, there are those people out there who are just stone corrupt, sociopaths, terrible, out to get theirs without getting
Is there more of those now, or let's see? I need that graph.
See, I think probably, my thought is that the majority of organizations find that if they engage in that behavior for too long, they die. They die because
there's a consequence for that, and I love it when there is, because they shouldn't get away with it. It's criminal kind of behavior, and we're accepting it as the norm. And maybe I'm going too far with that, but yes, I'm hopeful that it won't go in that direction.
Well, we're going to see, for instance, a big and I'm not ripping on pharmaceutical firms as being evil or bad, but there have been practices in place.
Sure.
The firms have a part of that. The medical field has a part of that. And policymakers and government have a part that has contributed, looks like, to a tremendous opioid crisis.
Absolutely.
But
and
I
they're
think
in courts now having to pay back some money for that as we speak.
And that's going to be very painful. Folks are going to lose positions. Folks are going to lose money. Governments are going to be changed over that. But ultimately, I think most folks, if they had the choice going in, would have tried to foresee this. And I don't think many folks would have said, well, I just don't care. We're going to have a lot of addicts and a lot of people die, so what? I think probably it was more delusion, maybe not enough information, had never seen that, new drugs, those kinds of things. It's a very complex issue. So, again, was that a result of corruption? Well, we had a time where we had commercials that said, these are the cigarettes that the doctors smoke, So I don't think at the same time,
True.
I don't think the intent was to kill people. I mean, I don't think that was.
No, it's to make a profit and you
Right.
get rich, basically, because this is a land of opportunity. And one way you do it, you kind of push the envelope a little bit. And if few people get hurt along the way, you still make a good profit and you can pay those folks off or something. Yeah, that's a corruption idea, and I'm really wondering. Here's another idea that we haven't talked about, and I don't think it was that much in the book, but mental health. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of my background a little bit with this. And I find that, I'm really I think there's an overlay of this mental health with all these ideas that he's floated out there, particularly around the rational, humanistic, and other ideas that pushed along with science and so forth. That really, what does that look like? The mental health diagnoses of people and the narcissism that we have been seeing and people are talking about in our politics, the sort of the ego unrestrained notion, and also depression and anxiety that people are having during these times of upheaval, and there's not a calming effect. I've said that to friends. I probably said it to you at some point, that I believe that there's sort of this. I mentioned dysthymia, which is a low grade depression that's over, but I think it's also anxiety as well in there. I really think that there's something that's like a cloud at this point, and where are we seeing just the happy folks who seem to be mentally stable and having great families and everything? That's probably true. It's probably out there. But I am thinking that somehow mental health needs to be in one of these chapters from Pinker, where he's saying, hey, are we better off mentally? Is inferred in his writings, particularly along the ideas of education and so forth. But I'm kind of wondering how well are we dealing at an individual level of managing this huge amount of data, this contradictory data, alternative facts, all of the things that we sort of mentioned along the way today. That's one of my concerns. And then what do we do about that? And do we have sort of the resources to manage that as we're moving forward? I'm not so sure, but I'm hopeful again that, I believe folks are basically good. And I want to believe that, and I think we've got the outliers and the people out there that are sort of in the news and pushing things in a certain way for us to believe that it's more widespread corruption than it is, or mental illness in some cases. If you talk about crime and corruption, and substance abuse, you always have to add the mental health factor in there as well. It just wasn't covered enough. I'd like to see him do a lot more with it, because I think there's a lot more information that we should know.
Well, and to your point, all you have to do is walk down the city streets and see the vast increase of people living on the street. And now that's something that as a society we sort of grudgingly seem to accept, or turn our eyes away from, and that kind of thing. But clearly, the mental health approaches haven't been working over the last, really, going back to the early 70s. And, there are historical reasons for that, but at the same time, there are historical reasons for that doesn't get us off the hook in terms of addressing it, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think a number of you go to any big city now. There's Los Angeles as this tent city. It takes up blocks and blocks where people are living on the streets. It continues to get worse. There's not a lot of good answers for that. You can build housing, as they've done in certain Western cities and so forth, but that doesn't get the people into those and living the life that maybe they could have. So it's a giant question from my perspective, and I think we need more information to sort of figure out. Because taking back in your idea of education, there was a big push a while back for data-driven decision making.
Right.
Those were the key words. Right. Sort of the buzzwords in education, probably in other places as well. Maybe even in government in some ways. But we need that data. We need the information in order to make a decision. I think that's where it fits. And then we've got to have lawmakers and people in government and the support of the general population to say this is an important issue. This is something we need. We'll all be better off if we tackle it and come out with a good solution for it. I don't think we're there with this tribalism and nationalism and other things that are going on right now.
Well, here's the other thing. The solutions are hard work.
Yes, they are.
Teaching children is a job that requires a tremendous amount of commitment and dedication and energy. Addressing the homeless situation, it requires that same kind of commitment and tremendous amount of energy. And, I think sometimes people may be a little afraid of those kinds of commitments. At the same time, growing crops in a drought requires a tremendous amount of commitment and energy. So, we take for granted that, whoever's doing the work of farming is just going to have to suck it up and have insurance to deal with the drought and come back stronger than that. Well, you know what? I get that that's, if we're not successful there, we don't eat. But at the same time, if we're not successful with educating our young, then we don't have a strong economy. And if we're not successful in addressing mental health in a homeless situation, then who are we really as human beings?
Yes, that's a great question. Who are we, and what do we want, and how do we flourish in life? What is this? I mean, it's almost one of those basic questions, and I think he sort of addressed this at the beginning of the book, but I've heard others talk about this idea of really it's an existential question. What are we here for? What do we do with our life, and so forth? He mentioned at one point the goal of maximizing human flourishing, life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, and the richness of experience. So we've got this life to live, and we probably should do a better job in thinking about how we want it to be, and then acting on that and moving in that direction. Those are kind of tough questions for a lot of people who are just day to day. We're trying to figure out, how to pay the bills and how to move to the next thing, but I think that those are the big questions like that, and the ones you mentioned about mental health and homelessness and the problem with that, and coming up with a solution, coming up with a plan to deal with that so that all people can flourish and have a great life experience. Why not? Look at the trends that he's got in his book. Everything's getting better, so to speak, in quotes, but why aren't more people enjoying it, and why are we sort of stuck in some misery somewhere? Big questions.
My only response has to do with me personally. And this is sort of a bellwether month and year for me for a lot of reasons. But you had asked me, I had mentioned to you earlier that I had been on a retreat. It was sort of a personally self-imposed retreat. I didn't go anywhere. I just hung around the house, did some reading.
I really, when you said retreat in your text, I really thought, wow, he's with a group up on a mountain.
Up in the Rockies,
and you're doing these kind of things. But it's even better than that. This was a retreat you took for yourself, and I think that's a great idea.
And I just wanted to reflect on some things. And one of the outcomes of that, I sort of looked back at my life and looked forward too. And I found that the times when I felt the most alive and the times that I was the most effective were not the times when I was about me, myself. They were the times when I was about a mission, or I was about Columbus State University, or I was about the Phoenix City Schools, or I was about the Alexander City Schools, or I was about my family. Those times when I was about me and what did I get and what was going to be meaningful to me, I found that I just sort of lost my way. So that's a gut check. And every day,
we all need one.
Every day, I think it's a battle to make that realization for me. I don't know if that has anything to offer about a lot of these things.
No, I think it's great. And to take the time out, I guess that is kind of an issue that, well, I wanted to say something about reading a good book, or reading a book like this that has so much information on it, and we're reading less. Mm-hmm. Oh, boy. That's kind of
another podcast, isn't it?
That's a whole nother thing. But I do think you're on the right track where you take a break, you do some inventory on what you want, where you're at, what you're going to do. Don't we all need to do that? And I'm not so sure everybody the Joe walking up and down the streets doing that, I want to wave the flag out there and say, hey, stop and think, reflect, be introspective, think about the future, think about the past, figure out your next steps. And it's not about you, it's about how you can help other people. And as soon as we get everybody on that train, I think we're going to be better off.
In full disclosure,
thought,
though,
anyway.
When I was working full time and had a lot of responsibilities on my plate, it was a lot more difficult. As an old retired professor, I actually have the time to do this. So I'm not advocating it necessarily as, hey, I did it, and, that kind of thing.
No, but I think it does make sense. And I'm all about folks taking time out to really think about what they want and how they're going to get it, what's stopping them from getting it, making good decisions that not only affect themselves but affecting others. So we try to do that in our counseling efforts, and I think it's something that we probably need to do as individuals. Tom, I've enjoyed our discussion today. This book is 500 pages. It's a big, thick book, lots of charts and graphs, and it is. And I think I texted you at one time. I said I'm trying in reading this, but there are different ways to read a book. You can get it in Audible, so you can. I want to shout out to Audible, who we wish was a sponsor, so that people can listen to books now if you don't have time to sit down and read. But the idea of reading this book and taking time out to sort of compare what this cognitive psychologist, has offered, I think has been enlightening.
Good thinker, good scientist, good writer, great book. And my ultimate response would be, and there are more levels of complexity than even addressed in the book. So, somewhere out there is the truth, as the X-Files always put.
Okay, I'm glad you got that X-Files reference in there. I will say this. I guess I dropped his name several times during this conversation, but our dear friend Malcolm Gladwell, we've got to go there. We've got to talk about him and what he's been doing. We'll talk more about some of these psychologists and others out there who are writing and giving us food for thought. So, Tom, it's been a pleasure. I hope you've had a good day today. I guess we can end right there, and I'll see you next time.
So long, everybody.
The one that I'm sure will come up later in the video with over 1 million views, might be up to 2 now. I'm not really sure. I haven't checked in a minute. But it was a style just like this. It was one of our behind the scenes videos that we did with Lyrical Lemonade. And the way we shoot it, the way we edit it, the way we interact with people, the way we keep the good relationships going is what allowed us to keep things going.
Absolutely. I like hearing that too, because I think we can all learn from each other, and that's a nice crew, right? That was a good shot of you guys in that. In there as a group shot.
The good thing about
this is on TV, because this got this guy on there. This guy from England?
Well, this
Mr. Bean.
There you go. You gotta add a little flavor.
Okay, all right.
Got to make sure people still watching.
Yeah.
Okay.
What makes your peanut butter and jelly sandwich better than somebody else's? So
okay.
It's
Yeah. Well, the wheel has been invented. There's no doubt about that. Your wheel can go a little faster, slower, bigger, wider.
Absolutely.
You want to go. Got to be yours, by the way.
Well, that's the important part. You got to be you. You got to stay you. Because a lot of people try to change you.
Right. We have 2 short films that we're almost on the brink of finishing.
Dun.
Once we finish those, guys,
let's talk about
I'm telling you, we're going to make an impact in this film community.
All right, this is music to my ears right here. You guys can't go too far without telling me more about. You've got
this
2,
is an
not
exclusive,
1, but 2.
We got two
exclusive TVT exclusive.
Yes, sir.
A lot of people don't know about it, but like you said, anybody knows any good feature film work, it takes a while to process.
You're keeping it under wraps, but you're right about that. I mean, it does take a long time to get those shots, and particularly if you're shooting a short film, you want it cinematic. You want it to really kind of take the viewer where you want the viewer to go by watching that one scene and cutting to the next and so forth. So, that's very cool. Tell me a little bit more about whatever you can tell me. I'll take. Come on, you got to You got to break a little ice on this thing. somehow.
Well, without actually telling the plot, a little background story. Well, background just of what we're doing. Well, pretty much we meet a lot of different influential people every day, and we have, I want to say, we have custom relationships with each person, and with these relationships, I'm trying to find a way where, I wouldn't quite say like monetize a relationship, but I want to make sure we can use a relationship in a way that works for us, as well.
Right.
So, while I was doing the short film, I was like, the people I was coming across, I was asking them like, hey, would you mind being a part of this short film? Or, hey, would you mind if your artist be a part of this short film? And they always ask me, like, hey, what's the plot? What is it about? And as soon as I tell them, they usually are on board. So pretty much we've met tons of people that say they want to be involved, and even if they have a small role, just those people being in the role just for however long they're being, it's going to just bring a huge awareness to what we're doing. So
You have a story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today.
You did a great job the other day on ad-libbing on the street videos. Dr. Long,
appreciate that.
Dr. Long shot me an email, and the title of the email was Street Videos. And he was, yeah. So I thought, we're in trouble now.
No,
But,
street videos.
But street video.
can I plug that in there?
As long as I can have street tacos in there somewhere.
You got a
I'm good.
plug there? Try it. If it is, you got a plug.
This
try it.
man, see, this is what I've learned. I've learned that I can't take him anywhere.
All right, there you go.
I've learned that for sure.
He's trying to. He's already sent like 12 Instagrams and 42 tweets out. And what's up?
Unfortunately,
Go ahead, because you don't want to hear what I gotta say.
unfortunately, Dr. B,
Yeah.
we put out tons of great quality work,
All right.
and the thing is, they see it.
Okay.
They might not click on it, but they see it. So make sure I'm putting it in, an available space for them to see it. So that's
In their own time, because we understand people come to their, their own lights and understands in their own time and space. So, it'll be out there. You can take your time, go do what you gotta do.
Well, I'm just glad to have you guys in the studio. That's all.
But Santi is the man to be. I just want to let y'all know Santi
All right.
is the man.
Santi, you were talking those street videos, and Dr. Long sent me he liked them, by the way. He really thought it was kind of cool ad lib about it. You guys were just
I was reading off
you were
the teleprompter.
freestyling. No, you were not. You were out there, man. And
The words were just,
I mean, the word came in. Somebody said the word alien, and then it was like, hey, you. Alien hunters, you need to have a podcast. I like it. So
gotta grab the attention.
That was very cool, very smooth, and I think that's an example too of just being yourself and being in the moment, and responding with that authenticity we were talking about a moment ago, and having fun at the same time. Now you can't have fun all the time because that doesn't necessarily make money. And move the part A down to part B.
But go back to your last point real quick. It's one thing we've learned, and to what you just pointed on, being yourself. That's one of the main things that we've learned throughout working with everyone we work with is we had to stay true to who we were, regardless of what happened.
Makes sense.
We were put in a lot of different scenarios and situations and places where you're often given a choice. Do you be you, or do you switch it up? And we've, since day one, we've stayed true to ourselves. Comes with the good and the bad, but overall we like
Comes with the bad.
Let's say sometimes it comes with the bad.
Not everybody's going to be a fan, right? I mean, you better.
There are a lot of non-fans.
Right. What you said.
All right, that's what he said. All right, so but I'm thinking you're right about that. But that that's part of life, and sort of moving through those moments. That it's not all about your hurt feelings, or it's not all about some thought you have in your head all the time. You got to kind of move on and get over that, and not be so self-critical, or not have your ego so fragile.
Egos are out there. If you want to be, I don't want to say, you got to, in order to be successful, you got to remove your ego, because there's a lot of successful egotistic people.
Oh yeah.
But like he said, with these relationships nowadays, with the way the society is if you can just maneuver better, is that me?
I think that is.
If you can just maneuver better with people, aka, like you said, sometimes don't always think about yourself. Don't put you in front of everything. Things will work better, because if everyone is thinking about everyone else, then everyone is taken care of. It's that simple. Because if you're just only thinking about yourself and you can't care for another person, like no one else can be cared of than just you.
So the transits that are still interesting to us here in 2019 are the ones that are taking place in other solar systems.
Okay.
Now, wait a minute. That
Yes.
implies something, right?
Yes, it does.
That implies that there are actually planets around other stars. And in fact, the very way we discovered planets around other stars had to do with the way that the planets were orbiting around those parent stars.
Right.
And so there's a whole new class of planets that we know a lot about now.
Yes.
That are called extrasolar planets.
Extrasolar planet.
Extrasolar. Extrasolar means they're not orbiting our sun, they're orbiting another star.
All right.
We now know of over 4,000 extrasolar planets.
Wait a minute. 4,000.
Over 4,000. And by
Over
the way, that
4,000.
number keeps going up, so it's a little bit hard for me to keep track. I think the latest number I saw was 4,084 known confirmed exoplanets or extrasolar planets.
Incredible.
And so by the way, let me throw that shortening in.
Yes.
You'll see the word exoplanet.
Right.
And exoplanet is just because guys like myself got tired of saying